Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. My name is Damien Cooper, and today we're talking about the brand new Tokina ATX 11-20mm ICF lens. And when I'm talking brand new, I mean it. This lens has just been released, and I was so fortunate to actually be able to test it for a couple of weeks and give you my completely honest opinion about this lens. And here's a little disclaimer. I've been shooting professionally for over 10 years now, and I have always been a fan of G Master and Canon L series lenses, and I was always a little skeptical when it came to cheaper lenses from third-party manufacturers. As a matter of fact, I've owned maybe a handful over the last decade, and 100% of them I have sent back eventually and replaced them with their Canon L or Sony G Master equivalent. But since we recently added the Blackmagic Pocket 6K to our arsenal, we needed something that is a little wider than our 16-35 by Canon. And when looking at Canon's native lens lineup, there isn't really anything that fit my need, because I like to shoot wide open, I shoot in a lot of low light situations, so I really wanted to have something with a fast aperture. So after a little bit of research, I ended up looking at Tokina lenses, and they have a wide variety of wide-angle APS-C sized lenses. So I reached out to them and asked if they had any lenses for us to review, and I was looking at the 11-16mm, but they said they have a brand new lens that is just coming out, and it's the 11-20mm that we're going to review today. So yes, they did send us the lens, but I'm in no way obligated to say anything specific about this lens, and this is 100% my honest opinion. So first point on our list, let's talk about the build quality. And like I said, it's not an A-list lens, but it definitely feels of high quality, and most of the case is actually aluminum and metal, and it really feels nicely in your hand. The one thing that I don't really care about too much is the autofocus and manual focus ring. Instead of having just a small button as you do on most other lenses, you have this mechanism where you switch the focus ring and turn it on and off for switching between autofocus and manual focus. And I've seen this on other lenses before, and I never really liked the mechanics at all. And especially with this lens, it just oftentimes happens that you're stuck somewhere in between and you didn't really pull it all the way through, or you just hit it by accident and you're in manual focus mode and accidentally switch into autofocus. Other than that, the focus ring is pretty great and it works well, so when you're actually in manual focusing, you can actually pull this pretty neatly and pull focus with it. So overall, I'd say the build quality is a 4 out of 5, and the 1 point deduction is due to me not really caring about that focus ring mechanism. So in general, the lens is rather small, and that is something I like because it's perfect for using it on a gimbal with a Pocket 6K or basically any other camera, because it's lightweight and easy to balance. But it doesn't feel cheap in your hand because it still does have a little bit of weight to it, but nothing compared to, for example, its full frame 11-20mm counterpart by Canon. The lens has an 82mm filter thread, and that is pretty cool because most of our filters are 82mm anyway. And although it's a super wide angle lens, it can still be used with any regular 82mm filter thread. It is a little bit arched and it still protrudes. Is protrude the right word? Maybe. So the glass protrudes a little bit, but it's not enough to actually not be able to use a regular filter system, and you don't have to use a matte box or anything. You can just use your regular screw-in filters, which is pretty cool. So for the majority of our shots, we didn't use ND filters and just cranked up the shutter speed to really see what the image quality of the lens looks like and not have it distorted or interfere with any kind of ND filters. Then on our last shoot, we were so confident in the lens that we actually did use an ND filter, and the results were pretty great. And the thing that everybody is most interested in is the overall image quality. And when it comes to image quality, we have a lot of subcategories, so let's start with sharpness. And here I was actually really surprised because this lens is really sharp, edge to edge. Yes, it's no secret that I like to shoot wide open most of the time, so the majority of our testing was done at an aperture of 2.8. And here again, I was pretty surprised at the overall sharpness of the lens. Yes, it's not a Sigma 18-35 when it comes to overall sharpness, but it doesn't have to be. And for us, it ties in very nicely with our Canon glass that we already have, so we can just seamlessly integrate it into our shoots and not see a big difference in sharpness. And the same goes for colors. It renders colors very well and it ties in nicely with our existing Canon glass. But having a lens that actually shoots at 11mm, obviously the biggest question is, does it distort on the edges? And when I was using it at 11mm, I couldn't see any distortion whatsoever. So here's a couple of shots where you can see I had some straight lines right on the edge and all the lines actually stayed straight. So the next big thing that people worry about at 11mm is obviously vignetting. We were shooting with the Blackmagic Pocket 6K as well as our EOS R in 4K, and we just had a handful of shots in with the C300 Mark III. On the Pocket 6K there was hardly any vignetting at 11mm, and there was none with the EOS R that has a slightly bigger crop. But when using it with the Canon C300 Mark III, we did have some weird vignetting issues. The C300 has a slightly bigger Super 35 sensor than the Pocket 6K does, and when using the internal ND filters, we sometimes had them show up in kind of a ring formation inside of our image. It didn't happen all the time, and sometimes it happened and then just went away on its own, but that is definitely something to know. Although you have to keep in mind that when we tested this, the C300 wasn't even out yet, so this is probably a software issue because it just happened sometimes and it didn't happen on other occasions, so it definitely isn't the lens fault as it can't cover the entire Super 35 sensor of the C300, and I would assume that it's somewhat of a software issue. One thing that is probably not going to be fixed, even though with a firmware issue, is that there is a slight vignetting on a larger Super 35 sensor like the one on the Canon. So if you're using a C300 Mark III or a C200 and you're looking for this lens for these kind of cameras, note that there might be a slight vignetting, but it wasn't even too bad. Although we don't plan on using this ever for this kind of purpose, some of you might, so we actually did some autofocus tests on the EOS R in 4K. And the autofocus wasn't even too bad. It was fast, it was responsive. But there's one thing that you definitely have to keep in mind, that when you're focusing, that it's really loud. So if you want to kind of use this lens for vlogging on your camera and you're using a shotgun microphone on top of your camera, it's probably not recommended. And this is one of the reasons when I was using third-party lenses earlier on different cameras, that was one of the issues when using it for documentary setups and using a shotgun microphone, you can definitely pick up the sound of the autofocal motors. And the Tokina 11-20mm is no different. So yes, overall you can use the autofocus, it's quick, it's responsive, but it's loud, so keep that in mind. We personally don't intend on using the autofocus on this lens ever, so it's not really an issue for us. So what did we use this lens for, and what are we going to use this lens for? As I already stated, I think it's a great lens for overall gimbal use, and it might actually be the lens that is going on our gimbal when using the Pocket 6K in 90–95% of the time. The next use case is using it in small spaces, because you just have so much more room with 11–20mm than on a 16–35, for example. And since it's a 2.8 aperture, you can easily use it indoors in low light as well. Another big pro of this lens is that you can get some really cool looking angles in that you just can't get with the 16–35. You can get really close to your subject and just get this really in-your-face, wide-angle feeling. We were using this lens a lot on our last fitness shoot, and we got some pretty cool and unique angles from it. But then going to 20mm, you can still get some decent mid-shots with a little bit of bokeh if you don't really want to switch lenses all the time. So having this extra 4mm compared to an 11–16mm gives you a little bit more versatility. And the last use case that comes to mind is if you want to shoot time lapses on your Pocket 6K, because you have so much more room to work with. Us personally, we don't ever shoot time lapses on the Pocket 6K because we use our EOS R, because we have just way more flexibility and can actually shoot pictures instead of just still frames. But if you want to use this for time lapses, then I think it's a must-have because of just the more room you can cover with it. I'm currently in Italy editing the footage, and I totally forgot to talk about focus breathing. And to make this short, there really isn't any, which is kind of expected with a lens of that focal range, but still really good to know. So according to my source, the lens should be out by now and you could purchase it for a retail price of around $230 US, which I think is really fair for a lens with that kind of quality. So overall, yes, this lens gets my 100% recommendation, and we will be using this for our gimbal work, for some cool angles, and whenever we need a little bit more room to work with. So to sum it all up, the only thing I didn't really like about this lens is the manual focus ring and its mechanism from switching to autofocus to manual focus, and I wish they would have just used a click button like pretty much any other lens. So there you have it. This was our review of the Tokina 11-20mm 2.8 ATX IC f-lens. Wow, that's a mouthful. As always, if you want to see more content like this and see more content shot on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K or any other content we're putting out, I would love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up because it really helps our channel grow, and I hope to see you on the next one.